I think it is very necessary to understand well the cloud of unknowing and to establish the Christian tradition behind centering prayer. I was a tiny bit surprised and maybe a little bit dismayed when we had a group meeting at Snowmass a few months ago, about 20 teachers of centering prayer, and I asked them how many used the cloud of unknowing when they taught. And only about half of them did. And I had a priest friend who made a retreat, a 5-day retreat on centering prayer at my recommendation, and when he finished, and I saw him a few months later, I asked him some questions about the cloud, and he says, well, what's that? So now apparently it is being taught. Centering prayer or contemplative prayer, according to the cloud, is being taught without the cloud. Well, now if it's being done, it can be done. But I recommend strongly, and this perhaps will be my emphasis this morning, that when you teach contemplative prayer, you have the cloud in your hand. I really think it should be taught from the cloud of unknowing. You remember, of course, a few years ago when Cardinal Ratzinger came out with his admonition concerning problem relationship with Eastern approaches and techniques to meditation. Many people in the contemplative outreach movement were, I think, unduly disturbed by it. I thought it was a marvelous warning. I'm not too sure he understands what contemplative prayer is, but nonetheless, on a theoretical level, I thought it was worthwhile. The weekend that came out, I had been asked to give a contemplative prayer retreat to a group of 15 people at the United Church of Christ in Denver. And some of these people were friends of mine, and one of them asked me if I would do this because he said, we meet each week, 15 of us, for a 40-minute meditation period, and every one of us has learned meditation from a different source. Some of them learned it through Tibetan insight meditations, others through transcendental meditation, still others through Zen. And what they wanted was a common Christian basis for their meditation. We went through the contemplative prayer according to the cloud, and when I got back to Snowmass a few days later, Father Thomas gave me a copy of Cardinal Ratzinger's letter. And I read it, and I said, you know, if you had been at my workshop this weekend, you could have duplicated Cardinal Ratzinger's letter from everything I told those people. Because I gave all the warnings he gave, and all the cautions and all the distinctions. And so therefore, naturally, I thought he did a marvelous job. But the thing I want to stress is, as I recall, the only thing that he recommends positively in that book is the cloud of unknowing. So when you're coming from the cloud, and particularly today when we, people who teach contemplative prayer, are coming across from some criticism from some fundamentalist Catholic sources, and accusations, for example, of it being New Age and Eastern meditations and so forth. When you're coming from the tradition of the cloud, you're coming from a 14th century Catholic tradition that is datable very easily and obviously to the 6th century Catholic tradition, and of course even before that. So when you're coming from that source, you're beyond criticism in terms of orthodoxy and in terms of our authentic tradition. And so that's why I like to emphasize that. In order to use the cloud, of course, you have to know the cloud, and you should know it well. I've read the cloud, I would say, certainly 150 times, the most recent time being yesterday. In airports, I read the book from cover to cover. And it's constantly offering me new insights and new understandings. So I think it's extremely important. My interest in the cloud came really, is very practical, and I see it as a manual of prayer. 2 years ago, when I was still in Israel, a professor of comparative religion at the Hebrew University came on retreat. It was a Jewish professor, and he comes every year for a 10-day retreat at the monastery. And the abbot told me that he was coming, who he was, and that he was doing research in the cloud of unknowing. So I was very interested, and I went to see him. And we talked about it, but we were talking on different levels entirely. He was interested in the manuscript tradition. He was interested in the glosses and the margins, and where some translator may have taken in an element from some 7th century John of Sysopopolis or something like that. And I wanted to talk about it as, look, this is a method of prayer. You sit down and you do it. And he had no interest in that whatsoever. So we really never quite got together. So my own experience of contemplative prayer really followed along traditional and predictable lines. It was traditional and predictable, and I'm sure Carl could back me up on this, that in the seminary, we were, as a matter of fact, in the Dawson Seminary, we were really taught, contemplative prayer is not for you. We will tell you something about it on a theoretical basis because maybe you might be in a parish that has a convent of Poor Clare nuns or something like that, and once in a while they might have a contemplative. So you get 1/2 a credit, 1 class a week for half a semester in your deacon year on contemplation. And that was when I, sallied forth into the priesthood to teach and save the world with that kind of a background. And it wasn't until 6-7 years later, when I had my conversion and became a monk, that I learned contemplative prayer. But I learned it again going through Lectio, going through meditation, going through Oratio, and finally into contemplative prayer. And with not a great deal of help from the novice master or my spiritual director, as a matter of fact. Negative help in the sense that when I told them where I was and what I was doing, they would say, all right, but no positive instruction, which I think was unfortunate. And after a year or so, I ran across a copy of The Cloud of Unknowing in a dusty corner of the library in Middle English. And I read it and was fascinated by it because I found that this was a magnificent expression, a very accurate and clear expression of what my experience had been. And so I became quite enamored of the cloud. Well, anyway, the cloud, as you know, is an expression of apophatic theology. Apophatic is the Greek alpha privative, phatic meaning form or shape. So the a means without, or a negative for, article. So without form, it's theology or prayer without form, as contrasted to cataphatic, which means theology or prayer, kata, according to form, or as we call it sometimes, negative and positive theology. How many of you have copies of the cloud? Oh, wonderful, you have wedding garments, I'm glad. If you wanted to, I'll refer to the cloud, I'll refer to it by chapter, and also I'll give you the page of Johnston's translation. So in Johnston, page 139, and for the others, some of you have, I see the Paulist fathers, chapter 70, in the first paragraph. And this is the understanding that the author of the cloud has of his own work. He says, our spiritual faculties are equally limited in relation to the knowledge of God as he is in himself. For however much a man may know about every created spiritual thing, his intellect will never be able to comprehend the uncreated spiritual truth which is God. There is a statement of apophatic theology. And a thing that I like to stress, and you'll probably hear me say 100 times today. What the mind cannot grasp, the will can embrace. And that's the heart of apophatic prayer, and I think it's the heart of the cloud of unknowing. What the mind cannot grasp, the will can embrace. So then he goes on to say, there is a negative knowledge which does understand God. It proceeds by asserting everything it knows. This is not God, until finally he comes to the point where knowledge is exhausted. This is the approach of Saint Denis, who said, the most divine knowledge of God is that which is known by not knowing. That's not gobbledygook. That's an intelligent and understandable statement. Anybody who reads Denis's book will find confirmed there all that I have been trying to teach in this book from start to finish. So to understand the cloud, then we have to go back to Dennis, okay? And that's what we will do now. We'll take a look at Dennis's book. Now, Dennis is the English form. In Greek, the word is Dionysius. And he signs his work Dennis or Dionysius the Areopagite. I refer you to the Classics of Western Spirituality, Volume 52, Pseudo-Dionysius, The Complete Works, Paulus Press, 1987. Until this came out, I think there was only one English edition of the Mystical Theology of Dennis that was put out in long, long out of print by the Society for the Preservation of Christian Literature in England. And other than that, it was just about completely unavailable. Now, this Western Spirituality volume is 300 pages, and 150 of them at least are commentary. So all of the works of Dennis, all 5 of his works, very, very brief, can fit into less than 150 pages of this book. Just for completeness sake, I'll give you his works. He has written the Divine Names, and then the Mystical Theology, and that we're particularly concerned with. Sometimes it's called the Divine Gloom, or the Hidden Divinity. The Cloud of Unknowing refers to it as Dennis's Hid Divinity. Then he also has written 2 very esoteric works, the Ecclesiastical Hierarchy and the Celestial Hierarchy, and then there are some letters. Now, the author of the man who signed himself as Dionysius actually takes the name from Acts 17, 16 to 34, where Paul visits Athens. And Dennis was a Syrian monk, probably of the Monophysite persuasion, that is, those who saw only one will in Christ, the divine will, and no human will, but a human nature. And he wanted to give his work, which he wrote probably in Athens in the 6th century, he wanted to give his work apostolic or sub-apostolic authority. And a natural name for him to pick would be the patron saint of Athens. Today, if you go to Athens today and you go to the Catholic Church, as distinct from the Greek Orthodox Church, it's the Church of St. Denis, who was considered to be the first bishop of Athens. Well, St. Paul, you remember in Acts 17, he says, you know, you men of Athens, if you've been to the Acropolis, you know, you go up to the Acropolis and you look down, and about halfway up there's another hill, which is called the Areopagus. And this was the forum, the Hyde Park, if you will, or the Boston Common of Athens, where anybody could come and speak on any subject they wanted to. And this is where Paul was speaking. And he says, you know, I was wandering around your Acropolis, and I looked at all of the temples and the marvelous statues of all of your gods, and I saw one statue that was dedicated to the unknown God. Now, we know they did that because they had so many gods, they didn't want to leave any out and offend any god, you see. So they had an unknown God statue. And Paul says, this is the God I want to talk to you about. And he preached Christ. And of course, you remember when he spoke of Christ rising from the dead, they wouldn't listen to them. Well, we'll listen to you another time. But then it says in the last verse, Acts 17:34, a few did join him to become believers. Among these were Dionysius, a member of the court of the Areopagus. So that's all we know about Dennis or Dionysius. Well, the tradition has it that he became the first bishop of Athens. Now, another tradition, which is mythological, because it doesn't fit in historically, is that he went then to France and became the Bishop of Paris. It's interesting. Now, Paul picks this, Dennis picked this name because Paul is talking about the unknown God, and Dennis wants to talk about the unknowable God. You see, there is a connection. Now, I think there's a further connection here because, at least mythologically, Dennis went to Paris and he was beheaded on the Ile de la Cité in the Seine, where Notre Dame Cathedral is. And he didn't like that, so he picked up his head and he walked about 3 miles to Montmartre to be buried, see, carrying his head. So whenever you see Dennis, you see him with no head, carrying his head in his arms. Well, that again is appropriate, you see, for apophatic theology. Now, we know that Dennis is really not the author of this mystical theology that we're going to be talking about. It's a pseudonym, and so he's referred to as Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. We know it's a pseudonym because, first of all, he's not quoted by any of the fathers before the 6th century, which means he wasn't known, which means he really didn't exist. And secondly, we have found within the context of Dionysius actual quotes or near quotes from the 6th century Greek philosopher Proclus, who worked out of Athens. And so we know that this is a 6th century work and not a 1st century. Now, there were two problems with his work, but first of all, I'd like to talk briefly about two of his works, the Divine Names and the Mystical Theology. The Mystical Theology is 5 pages, that's all, in the complete work. The Divine Names is a little longer. Now, the Divine Names is the classic example of cataphatic theology, positive theology, the via positiva. Dennis goes through the Bible and he takes out in the Old and New Testament every name of God that he can find, and even generic names such as fortress, a mighty fortress is our God, and names, of course, Yahweh, El Shaddai, Elohim, and so forth. And he takes every one of these names and tries to get whatever positive information the Bible gives us through these names about God on an intellectual level. So, and this is his example of the cataphatic theology. Now, in the mystical theology, he does just the opposite. He uses, and we'll see for in a moment, the apophatic. His works, in order to get to the West, had to go through 2 stages. First of all, they were Monophysite, even they were, by the Greek Orthodox, they were considered heretical. So he first of all had to be purified of his heresy in the East and in the Greek language. And this is done just for the sake of the names by 2 people. One we're fairly familiar with, Maximus the Confessor, and the other one is John of Scythopolis, who changed the text and made him more orthodox so he would be accepted in the East. Then the second step, he had to be accepted in the West. Now, there's a general tendency, unfortunately, still existing today, that anything written in Greek is not worth having in the West, and anything written in Latin is not worth having in the East. So he had to go from the Orthodox East to the Roman Catholic West. And John the Scotchman, John Scotus, actually translated Dennis into Latin and introduced him to the court of Louis the Bald in the 9th century. And then in the 13th to the 15th century, his works had tremendous influence. First of all, because he had sub-apostolic authority. He was presumably a disciple of Paul. However, I would be careful about stressing that too much, and I really think that that alone would be meaningless. The influence of Dennis is because he spoke to where people were and the experiences that people had. And I think that really is why he became so influential in the West even to today. Aquinas was very much enamored of him, wrote a commentary on his divine names, and actually quotes him 2,300 times. So let's look briefly then at the 2 works of Dennis and see. In chapter 3 of his Mystical Theology, Dennis says this. He gives a good expression of both cataphatic and apophatic theology. He says, "In the divine names I have shown the sense in which God is described as good, existent, life, wisdom, power, and whatever other things pertain to the conceptual names for God." I have discussed analogies of God drawn from what we perceive. I have spoken of the images we have of Him, of the forms, figures, and instructions proper to Him, of the places in which He lives, and of the ornaments He wears. I have spoken of His anger, grief, and rage, of how He is said to be drunk and hungover, of His oaths and curses, of His sleeping and waking, and indeed of all those images we have of Him, images shaped by the workings of the symbolic representations of God. Clearly that is cataphatic theology. See? Then he says, the fact is that the more we take flight upward, the more our words are confined to the ideas we are capable of forming. So that now, as we plunge ourselves into that darkness which is beyond intellect, we shall find ourselves not simply running short of words, but speechless and unknowing. But my argument now rises from what is below up to the transcendent. And the more it climbs, the more language falters. And when it has passed up and beyond the ascent, it will turn silent completely, until it will finally be at one with Him who is indescribable. So there you have an expression from the mystical theology of Dennis on cataphatic and apophatic. We'll stop now for a moment and then resume the apophatic understanding of Dennis.